Hi, I'm Daniel Seaman, and thank you for joining me here on Straight Up from the JNS studios in Jerusalem, Israel. Before getting into the topics for today, I want to address the comment section again. Last week, I referred to comments I received and addressed those. I should have taken the opportunity not only to address the critics, but also to thank the majority of you who leave supportive comments. I really do appreciate it. I read most of them, and I try to respond whenever I can, though with the volume coming in, it's not always possible. So thank you to everyone who takes the time not only to watch, but especially to those who leave comments that are thoughtful, encouraging, and make me feel good. It means a lot to me. Now, as for those who commented last week that they think we shouldn't be bragging about our achievements, or worse, they said that I should show empathy to our enemies in Gaza. I want to make one thing very clear. Not only do I not care about our enemies in Gaza, I'm not moved by their suffering. As they proved on October 7th, they're not helpless or pawns. These are people who not only celebrated the brutal murder of our children on October 7th, many of them participated in the atrocities themselves. The only remorse they express today is that they did not succeed in destroying us. And let's be clear about one thing. They killed 36 children during the war, but their intention was to reach every single one of our children, my children. But they were stopped before they reached all of us. And I want to take a moment to let you understand a little of what we here in Israel went through on October 7th. All we knew was that Israel was invaded. We all heard reports from family and friends of what was happening all over the country. On that day, I found it necessary to teach my kids how to use my gun in case anything happened to me. We planned how to barricade ourselves in the house should Arabs break in. With our neighbors, we made plans on how to defend the perimeter of our neighborhood should our Arab neighbors decide to join in the assault. What I did not tell my kids on that day was that I had a plan that if all else fails, I would make sure I have 4 bullets left. And if you understand what I'm saying, I was prepared to do whatever was necessary to ensure my family would never fall into the hands of those who carried out the horrors and the atrocities that I was watching being aired on Arab social media that day, platforms by Gazans on that day celebrating. So with that said, let's go back to the headlines that I spoke of earlier. The leading story this week is, of course, the Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to the United States and his meetings with President Trump and senior members of the American administration. I'm sure you're all seeing endless commentary, predictions, and expert takes across the media landscape. A lot of these rely heavily on Israeli outlets who have a clear left-leaning orientation. The same voices who forecast about Israel-U.S. relations have repeatedly missed the mark over the past 2 years. Yet they continue to shape much of the international conversation, often with a tone of certainty that isn't backed up by their track record. So I'll spare you yet another round of speculation and simply say this. Based on my experience in years in the Prime Minister's office and with the media, most of the commentators you're hearing really have no idea what's actually happening behind the closed doors. They're speculating. Trump and Netanyahu have a history of taking pleasure in letting the media chase shadows while they focus themselves on the real job. They will say what they need to say, but do what needs to be done. What they discussed in Mar-a-Lago were major strategic questions. That's not a big secret. How to move forward in Gaza, what the next phase of the campaign will look like, and how to address the growing challenges from Iran. The details will become clear very soon, when events on the ground begin to shift. In the meantime, major developments occurred with the power struggle here in the region as Netanyahu pulled a surprise move over Turkey and Turkey's attempt to dominate the region with the recognition of Somaliland, a week after the agreement signed with Greece and Cyprus. And more surprises are to be expected. This entire drama is unfolding in real time as an hysteric Turkish President Erdogan labels Israel as Turkey's #1 enemy. Doesn't really fit in with the narrative that's coming out of Mar-a-Lago. One of the sharpest takes on this comes from an Israeli media commentator, Yoram Edrei, who captured the moment with striking clarity. Edrei writes, and I quote, "Behind the bombastic rhetoric lies a much deeper truth. Erdogan understands that his regional ambitions are slipping through his fingers. Israel's move in Somaliland undermines Turkey's long-held dream of controlling the port of Berbera and vast areas rich in strategic resources. He continues, the rope is tightening, and Turkey's influence in the region appears to be weakening. And when that happens, Edri continues, Erdogan doesn't offer solutions. He fires off toxic headlines. He unleashes venom towards Israel. He tries to mask the loss of influence with louder and louder accusations. He goes on, meanwhile, Trump and Netanyahu are quietly constructing a powerful regional bloc to counter Iran, a coalition that includes the United States, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, and very likely India as well. This, Edri argues, is Netanyahu's strategic brilliance, not standing alone, but weaving a wide, cross-continental network of alliances that redraws the political or the geopolitical map of the Middle East. And, as he says, Erdogan sees the respect and influence Netanyahu is receiving on the world stage. And the reaction is predictable. He lashes out, attacks in every direction, and produces headline after headline filled with rage. Because he understands that the regional game is no longer being played by the old rules. Edri concludes that this isn't just another war of words. It's a geopolitical earthquake. Anyone paying attention can see it. The Middle East is changing right before his eyes and our own. I will add to this that these 2 weeks reflect a clear pattern. Israel is strategically encircling Turkey. This is what victory looks like, establishing dominance across energy, industry, military capability, and economic influence. And it's clear to me as well that the United States and Israel are fully coordinated. Each side will act according to its own national interests while taking into account the needs and priorities of the other side. That's the reality, not the noise that you hear, nor the headlines, nor the guesswork. Trump and Netanyahu will certainly address the fact that Lebanon, as of January 1st, 2026, have not fulfilled their obligations and are now in a blatant violation of the ceasefire. On the issue of Gaza, the UN Secretary General complained that Israel this week withdrew recognition and cooperation with UNRWA, because Israel discovered that UNRWA is infested with Hamas. Secretary General Guterres hasn't internalized the fact that Israel has changed and will no longer play along with the lies of the past. The winter weather, meanwhile, hit Israel with intensity this week, and as a result, Gazans are getting something that their supporters have openly called for: a typhoon sweeping their tents from the river into the sea. And Hamas still isn't impressed, as they continue to arm themselves and apparently continue building the underground tunnel infrastructure to attack Israeli communities again. As the floods brought the suffering to their people, it also brought about the collapse of a new tunnel that they were apparently constructing, exposing it to the Israeli forces on the ground. This map that you're watching gives you an idea of the extent of tunnels we found just in the Rafah area. So this issue will continue to have to be addressed soon enough by Israel. So much for that. Let's leave the speculation to the pundits and move on to something far more grounded and far more revealing about the way narratives are being shaped today. Who's going to tell you when it's too late? Who's going to tell you things aren't so great? You can't go on thinking nothing's wrong. The music to these lyrics should be playing in your head right now. You may also know Paulina Porizkova, a successful actress and model from the 1980s, the cover girl of the famous Sports Illustrated swimsuit annual issues that you see right here. I, of course, bought these magazines just to read the sports articles, just like Playboy. Anyway, model Paulina Porizkova also appeared in the video of the iconic 80s song Drive by the legendary band The Cars that I just quoted. She is as beautiful today as ever, and I follow her and her content on Instagram. I mention her not only for clickbait reasons, but because of this post that she shared on social media last week. I quote from her post, "Lighting a light in the darkness on the last night of Hanukkah." She says, "I was brought up Catholic, and many of my best friends and chosen family are Jewish. It has never felt as a divide." She continues, "Since the early teens of this century, all of us have been faced with event after event of blatant anti-Semitism. well before the horrifying events of October 7th and its consequences. Most of the Jewish people of the world, which for the record is only 0.2% of the world population and 2.4% of people in the United States, are innocent of Israel's government politics. Many live in other countries and have nothing to do with, she quotes, murdering babies in Gaza, unquote. That makes this a really good time to stand up for our Jewish friends. I, she says, like my Jewish friends, believe both Israel and the people of Palestine have the right to exist and live in peace. And that what is happening now is atrocious in all ways. But I also know, she says, that even the gentlest and most well-thought-out post on this topic will bury you in an avalanche of hatred online. And it is precisely because of this I feel I need to speak up now and defend my Jewish friends. I stand with my Jewish friends. When I read Paulina's posts, and I stress, she means well, her message is heartfelt, it is well-intentioned, I'm not being cynical or sarcastic here, and it comes from a place of genuine solidarity with the Jewish people. But I also see something else happening beneath the surface, something that reflects a much larger pattern. My problem is not her, but the Jewish people in her circle of friends and contacts. Because the worldview she absorbed didn't come from nowhere. It came from a certain type of Jew. The kind who believes that softening their Jewishness, minimizing their vulnerability, and blending into the dominant culture will protect them. These are Jews who have spent decades trying to make themselves acceptable by downplaying their own experiences. Jews who distance themselves from the Jewish heritage, from ancestral rights, from the strong Jewish identity, because they think it will win them favor among their peers. The message is always this: we're not like those Jews, even if they don't say it out loud. And when that becomes the model that non-Jews encounter, it shapes how they understand anti-Semitism itself. These are people who, when Jews are being threatened, harassed, even killed simply for being Jews, they step up, just as Paulina did here. They do it with sincerity and courage, but they will still carry the imprint of that earlier framing they got from their Jewish contacts. You see it in the way she insists that, and I quote, most Jews are innocent of Israel's government politics, as if Jews must be separated into good Jews and bad Jews to justify defending them. You see it in the reflective moral equivalency, the need to balance every statement with both sides, even when the topic is Jew hatred, not geopolitics. These are the rhetorical habits that decades of Jews created, trying to make themselves less threatening, less distinct, less Jewish. The tragedy of all this is that the very Jews who believed that diluting their identity would protect them ended up creating a language that now weakens the ability to defend the Jews everywhere. Just like this prominent Jew himself, Steven Spielberg, whose Schindler's List Foundation, created to support the Jewish community, has been found to be funding groups that vilify the Jewish state and spread falsehoods about the war in Gaza. Spielberg himself has made comments recently to denounce both Israel and Hamas, arguing, and I quote, "We can rage against the heinous acts committed by terrorists on October 7th and also decry the killing of innocent women and children in Gaza." This is the language that normalizes collective blame, a language that treats Jewish distinctiveness as something suspicious, a language that forces Jews to prove their innocence before they're even allowed to defend themselves. Now, contrast all of this with something else that I saw. This post by actress Juliette Lewis. She doesn't offer disclaimers. She doesn't separate Jews into categories. She didn't feel the need to explain who is innocent or justify why Jews deserve safety. She simply hung a sign outside her home and said, "We support our Jewish neighbors." And she wrote, "I made a sign to show publicly what my Jewish friends already know privately. I love and support them." That's it. No conditions, no qualifiers or moral hedging, just support and solidarity. I stand with you because you're my friends, because you've stood by me, because you deserve safety and dignity. Full stop. Paulina means well. She stands up. She's doing what many won't do. But the framework she uses, the disclaimers, the distancing, the careful reassurance that Jews are innocent, is the product of a world where Jewish identity has been recoded as a threat, where Jewish power is seen as illegitimate, and where Jews are expected to apologize for existing before anybody will even stand up for us. And this is why words matter. This is why narratives matter. Because once you accept the premise that Jews must be separated from Israel to deserve safety, or that Jewish identity must be softened in order to be acceptable, you've already conceded the ground on which Jew hatred grows. Paulina's heart is in the right place, but the language she inherited from Jews she knew from the culture around her is part of the very system that makes Jew hatred so easy to rationalize. And speaking of apologetic and soft Jews, warning, spoiler alert, in New York City. This week, social Islamist Mamdani swore in as the mayor of New York City on January 1st, 2026. This will one day be remembered as the greatest Islamic conquest of Western civilization. There's no going back on this. Once Muslims take over a place, they make it uninhabitable for the kufr, the non-believer. Just like they did with Lebanon, which was once the only Christian majority country in the Middle East. Just what they did with Bethlehem since taking over in 1995. A city that had been Christian majority for hundreds of years is now less than 10% Christian. What they will do in New York City will make what is happening in Minnesota look like child's play. And by the way, notice a pattern emerging here? Large-scale use of public funds in Minnesota, with some going overseas and to questionable groups. In Italy, Italian authorities uncovered a scheme in which several Italian-based charitable organizations secretly funneled over $8 million to Hamas terrorists in Gaza. According to investigators, the money was concealed inside medical equipment and supplies that were being shipped as humanitarian aid into Gaza. And Israel Channel 14 revealed this week how in Israel, money allocated by the previous left-wing government that was meant to improve the lives of Arab citizens here was diverted by the Arab parties and Arab municipalities to criminal gangs and most likely to terrorist groups. Think this won't happen now in New York City as well? All those complaining about where their tax-paying dollars are going, you think they will do better in New York City? Well, remember the end scene of the movie Planet of the Apes? How shocked we all were when Charlton Heston's character Taylor discovered the truth about what happened to New York City? Well, here's the spoiler. Don't be surprised. You maniacs, you did it. You blew it up, is what he said when he discovered what happened to New York. And this leads me to woke to the left, woke to the right. Unfortunately, we're not only dealing with the woke to the left as we see in New York City, there's also the woke in the right. By now, we are pretty used to the convergence of Islam and the woke left. But what we weren't expecting was the budding bond percolating between elements in the extreme right in the United States and Islam. But we shouldn't have been surprised because, as always, it has to do with the Jews, or more precisely, how they view the Jews. The explanation for all this is rooted in history and how both ideological camps are simply not accustomed to Jews asserting themselves. For the left, a confident and self-defending Jewish people disrupts the familiar script in which Jews exist primarily as victims, allowing them, the left, to signal moral superiority by lamenting Jewish suffering, meaning they can't virtue signal about the poor dead Jewish people anymore. For the extreme right, a strong and self-reliant Jewish community undermines the old dynamic in which Jews could be marginalized or intimidated. When we stand up for ourselves, they get visions of Jews controlling the world. Both reactions reflect historical patterns in which Jews were expected to remain passive. Both have found new ways to instrumentalize the Jewish story, whether through performative outrage on the left or through opportunistic alliances on the extreme right. These dynamics create a space where total opposite groups now can converge around criticism of Jews or of the Jewish state, each for their own ideological purposes. And no one is happier to indulge in their desires than the Islam. Speaking of Islamists' willingness to indulge, let's move on to CNN brain rot. Around the same time Paulina Porizkovo, I mentioned before, was gracing the covers of Sports Illustrated, another rising star was capturing America's attention, CNN. Yet while Paulina only grew more beautiful and more authentic with time, CNN went in the opposite direction. She stayed true to herself. CNN drifted. It forgot that its job is to report the news, to inform the public, not to shape political narratives or selectively present facts while omitting context. No wonder its ratings fell 26% this year. Nowhere is that decline more obvious than in their coverage of Israel. Recently, CNN hired an Israeli correspondent to report from Israel, Tal Shalev, but they did this without disclosing her well-known left-wing political agenda or the lens through which she views this place. And just last week, she published this item. This is a perfect example of how a distorted narrative becomes fact once a major outlet repeats it. The headline's claim is that Israel now ranks below Saudi Arabia and Russia in women's rights. Sounds dramatic and alarming, but it's also completely misleading. What the article doesn't tell you is that the ranking comes from a Georgetown University index. The same Georgetown University that has received over $1 billion from Qatar in the past decade and even opened a campus in Doha. And the reason Israel suddenly plummeted in the rankings isn't because women lost rights here. It's because the index added a criteria, measuring how many women live within 50 kilometers of an armed conflict. CNN and their correspondent deliberately scrolled over this because it is not Israel that has changed. It's the circumstances that have changed. Hamas launched a war on October 7th, and all of Israel was dragged into a conflict zone. That's not a measurement of gender equality. Using this study to draw a comparison between Israel, a democracy with female representation in politics, in the IDF, in the Supreme Court, and the high-tech sector, and a ridiculous dystopian story where women are enslaved as rented wombs, that's absurd. Saudi Arabia, where women need male permission to get a passport until just recently, where movement, dress, and speech are restricted, where custody automatically goes to the father, somehow ranks better than Israel, as does Russia, where thousands of women are trafficked every year. They're pushing a false narrative designed to create a distorted impression of Israel and undermine the standing and legitimacy of Israel's democratically elected government. That's their only purpose. And when CNN, still considered a credible source by many, repeats this without context, it is used as ammunition by Israel's detractors, activists, influencers, and organizations who have agendas that will cite this as proof. It spreads across the campuses, across Europe, across Australia. It feeds a growing hostility towards Israel, and by extension, towards Jews. At a time when the diaspora communities are already struggling with rising anti-Semitism. None of this means that Israel is perfect. We're not. No democracy is. You can criticize policies, debate reforms, argue representation, absolutely, but do it honestly. Do it with real data. Don't pretend that Saudi Arabia and Russia are suddenly feminist utopias because conflict zone metric was applied as an index. Half-truths, missing context, and dramatic symbolism poisons the debate. And this is the modern version of Jew-hating libels of the past. Well, let's move on to light onto nations now, literally. The Iron Beam laser-based air defense system has been deployed in Israel this week. And Israel has now become the first country in the world to field an operational laser system for the interception of aerial threats, including rockets and missiles. This milestone was made possible by Rafael's unique adaptive optics technology, representing a global scientific breakthrough. Iron Beam has more power, longer range, and can be used to defend against a wider array of threats. In addition to being able to shoot down drones, Iron Beam can also defend against missiles, rockets, and motors. That makes it far more formidable than if it were only capable of shooting down drones, which are relatively slow-moving threats. This is just one of the recent Israeli innovations that are changing not only Israel but the world. And it is written in the book of Isaiah, "He shall judge between the nations, and shall decide disputes for many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares." All except Hamas, that is. While Hamas focuses on turning water pipes into missiles, in Israel, engineers have developed a groundbreaking technology that turns ordinary water pipes into clean power generators. These pipes generate electricity by harnessing the natural pressure of flowing water. As water flows through these pipes with natural pressure, small in-pipe turbines spin and produce electricity, all without disrupting the water supply or adding any pollution to the environment. These smart pipes are already being tested in cities and rural areas, where they help capture energy that would otherwise be wasted. The system works day and night, providing steady stream of renewable electricity that can power homes, streetlights, sensors, or even feed energy back into the grid. And last year, for example, the Israeli company Bee Hero, a world leader in precision pollination, launched, and I quote, the global network of 1 million hives, a scientific initiative dedicated to addressing the global bee crisis. I mention these things because Israel has been extremely inventive in the years of our existence. Our circumstances have really left us no choice. We returned here after 2,000 years to a deserted, desert, bare, malaria-infested, swamp-ridden country, and within 1 century restored it literally to the land of milk and, as we see, honey. We did all this while fighting wars nearly every decade and terrorism every day, absorbing nearly 1 million refugees expelled from Arab countries that nobody talks about, and millions of Jewish immigrants from around the world. Just a few of the innovations created here over the years, such as drip irrigation, desalination devices, and more, are shared with third world countries. We train their population on site or here in Israel. Which exactly is why the way Israel is portrayed in certain media outlets is so jarring. Because instead of acknowledging the complexities, the struggle, the progress, the realities, some outlets choose to flatten the story into a caricature. They take the nation of Israel, built against impossible odds, and reduce it to a one-dimensional villain. They ignore context, they omit facts, and they frame narratives in ways that bear little resemblance to the truth on the ground. And that brings me to where I want to end today. Because while some media outlets are busy distorting Israel's story, Israel itself is busy writing the next chapter of what is happening here, in ways that actually matter. Israel, as we said before, is far from perfect. It is a nation that fights for its survival while still pushing the boundaries of science, engineering, and human potential. A nation that turns adversity into innovation. A nation that, even under fire, keeps building. And we in Israel will continue shaping the future long after the headlines fade. Thank you for joining me here on Straight Up on JNS Studios. I'll be with you again next week.